Every year, I get way too excited about awards season, and despite my enthusiasm, I usually end up missing a couple of the Best Picture nominees. Last year, it was Minari and Promising Young Woman, the year before that was Little Women, and before that was The Favorite and A Star is Born, and this can go on forever. This year, I didn't want to miss any of them, and I think I went a little bit overboard. So, I've seen every 2022 Oscar nominee in every single category, all 53 of them. And honestly, it's a weird perspective to have on the award season. I feel like every category I can now have a strong opinion of, and it makes me think about how much that has actually influenced my opinion in other years. Also, I'll probably end up doing a winner's predictions video, so if or when that happens, it'll be in the description. Also, this is going to be heavy on spoilers, maybe some light ones, just because I'm trying to cover a lot of the major elements, but I'm not going to be revealing any big twists of narratives or anything. So, without further ado, here is my review of every single 2022 Academy Award nominated film in every single category. Oh, and one more thing. The way we're going to do this is we're going to go through the nominations broadcast, and as each nominee is read off, the first time they are announced, I am going to review them. So some categories might be completely redundant with other categories, and we're just going to skip over those. So if I talk about something in Best Picture, I'm not also going to talk about it in Best Supporting Actor. Make sense? Cool. Let's go.
Here are the nominees for Best Picture. Belfast.
This was one of the first films I saw when actively paying attention to the Oscar films of the year, and I have to say that it was a pleasant way to start. I have a very tenuous relationship with Kenneth Branagh's films, but it's nice to see that he's capable of making a good movie when he's not just being a studio yes man, like with Thor or Artemis Fowl. Belfast isn't a masterpiece by any means, but it's very charming and personal with a lot of great supporting performances. Jamie Dornan and Ciarán Hinds embody fatherly and grandfatherly roles that you can tell were very formative to Branagh's upbringing. Katrina Balfe has some really standout moments too, but for some reason the supporting actress nomination went to Judi Dench, who does very little. However, the standout here is Jude Hill, whose performance is essentially the linchpin that makes the whole thing work. Child actors can often make or break a film, and Hill's performance not only keeps the material afloat, but in a lot of cases elevates it. It somewhat reminded me of Jojo Rabbit, and then it shows a tumultuous historical event in 20th century Western Europe through the eyes of a child, although it is definitely less of a comedy barring a few moments of levity. Overall, Belfast was really charming and sweet, but not my favorite of the Best Picture nominees, and I'm giving it a 7 out of 10.
Coda.
This is another really sweet one. The performances are fun all around, its direction is solid, and it's one of those movies that just leaves you feeling good by the end of it. It portrays the frustrations and barriers of being in a family that's a mix between deaf and hearing, but it gives a really great sense of empathy and warmth. I also had a really unique experience watching it. At one point, I accidentally muted my TV, so when I watched the scene where the main character sings to her deaf father, I thought the film was silent like it was in the previous scene where the family watches her recital. However, it was just me being a dumbass, but it was a really unique and beautiful way to experience the scene, and because I was totally oblivious to what was going on, it's one that I'll never quite be able to replicate. Overall, this is a very light and enjoyable film, and it gets a 7 out of 10.
Don't Look Up.
I've seen every Adam McKay film at this point, and I'm generally a big fan of his work. Anchorman and Step Brothers are classics, Talladega Nights holds a soft spot for me, and I even liked Vice for all of its weird tonal problems, but Don't Look Up is definitely my least favorite. For most of the runtime, it felt like the film was trying to just coast on its premise alone, and it didn't actually try to have, jokes. It's been criticized for having really heavy-handed satire, and while I don't have a problem with that in theory, they surprisingly don't do a ton with what they establish. Like yeah, Meryl Streep is doing a Trump thing, Mark Rylance is this Steve Jobs, Elon Musk hybrid weirdo, but once it's clear what everything is supposed to be an allegory for, it all just kind of becomes predictable. Like yeah, the comet is climate change, I bet they're gonna mine it for fossil fuels. Oh look, that's what happens. I bet Meryl Streep is going to persuade her supporters that the comet doesn't exist. Oh look, that's what happens. I actually found myself enjoying the dramatic moments more. The final dinner scene conveys this really specific combination of gratefulness and dread that tugs at your existentialist heartstrings. But the writing for most of the film just feels so lazy. It feels like less of a cohesive film and more of a means for Adam McKay to vent out his frustrations and blow off some steam. And I'm giving this a 4 out of 10.
Drive My Car.
So, my favorite film of 2021 was The Green Knight. As an English major with a particular interest in medieval manuscripts, a mind-bending, slow-burn, epic adaptation of one of my favorite poems of all time really had no competition. However, that feels like a default pick. If we're going to talk about something that really cut to my core, it's Drive My Car. I watched this movie at 3 in the morning and I could not sleep for the rest of that night. I made it to sunrise just laying in bed and thinking. The film articulates one of the clearest answers to why we create art that I've ever seen on film, and it left me questioning why I make my own art, why I enjoy others, and what I hope to get out of sharing mine. It left me feeling partly reflective, partly inspired, and partly exposed. I really felt like I was on another plane of existence for all 3 hours. It was ethereal, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10.
Dune.
This is another of my favorite films of the year. It's able to streamline a previously thought unadaptable book into a near masterpiece of a movie. Performances are great across the board, and although it's lacking conclusion, I think it cuts off at an appropriate point in the story that's way too big for just one movie. This is actually a really great way to introduce someone to Frank Herbert's world. It helped me keep track of the world building when I read the book immediately afterwards. I could talk for hours about Dune, but since it's essentially the Bible of science fiction, I feel like I wouldn't be contributing anything new to the conversation. All I can really say is that Denis Villeneuve does it again. It's going to sweep its technical nominations, and while its Best Picture nomination is obligatory, it would definitely be my vote to win. 9 out of 10.
King Richard.
King Richard is fine, but I think I'm just feeling a case of genre bias here. I can certainly see how the film is really inspirational, and it very much feels like an authentic love letter from the Williams sisters to their dad, but I don't have a ton more to say about it other than that. Will Smith is good, and he's certainly the frontrunner for Best Actor, but it really does feel like an overdue career award more than anything else. Ingenue Ellis is great, but her character feels a little underwritten for how much the movie tells you that you should be invested in her role in the girl's development. John Bernthal is also fun, the film looks really nice and it's competently directed, and the actual tennis sequences are really well edited. It's a good sports movie that's elevated by strong performances, but it's overall not my kind of thing. I'm gonna give it a 6.5 out of 10, but maybe if I'm able to warm up to sports movies it might creep up to a 7, we'll see.
Licorice Pizza.
For some reason, other Paul Thomas Anderson movies I've seen just haven't completely clicked for me. He's clearly talented and getting incredible performances out of his actors, but I've always had more of a respect for his films than any real love, but wow, did Licorice Pizza change that. It hits the perfect frequency of hangout movie that I really love. It's not too plotless, but it still gives a lot of room for these characters to just breathe and live their lives. I thought Cooper Hoffman and Alana Haim both knock it out of the park, and the revolving door of cameo supporting performances were also so energetic and fun. Bradley Cooper and Benny Safdie especially. The film has gotten a lot of flack for the age gap between the two leads, but I think it's acutely aware of how weird it is, and it treats it as such. It also, like nearly everything in PTA's movies, is very purposeful. The two leads are mirrors of each other in this respect. Gary is 15, but he behaves like he's 25, fresh out of grad school and eagerly jumping at every business opportunity he gets. Alana is 25, but she behaves like she's 15, impulsive, explosive, still living at home, and constantly seeking meaning in her life. This would definitely have my vote for Best Original Screenplay, and it's probably my third place pick for Best Picture, but I'm feeling really high on it at the moment, and I think I'm gonna just go ahead and give it a 9 out of 10.
Nightmare Alley.
As the Best Picture nominations were read off, it became increasingly obvious to me that Drive My Car was going to be an unexpected Best Picture nominee once it had racked up International Feature, Screenplay, and Director nominations. What I did not anticipate, however, was Nightmare Alley getting in, considering it only got Production Design, Costume, and Cinematography nominations. And hey, I'm pretty happy about it. It's not Del Toro's best work, but it's a damn enjoyable noir film with some amazing crafts. My main issue is that the first hour of the film is so good that I was less invested in the other hour and a half in comparison. I was enjoying the carnival so much that when the mentalism takes over, it's not bad, but it is kind of a letdown, and that's a weird compliment to give a movie. Part of it is too good for its own good. Otherwise, it's really solid, and I don't have a ton more to say about the substance of the movie, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and say 7 out of 10.
The Power of the Dog.
Before this movie came out, I was not familiar with Jane Campion, and that probably has to do with the fact that her last film was released when I was 7, but I can certainly see why she's had such a respected and acclaimed career. The Power of the Dog is masterful on so many levels. It synthesizes its cinematography, score, sound design, and overall tone into an incredibly rich atmosphere that kept me thoroughly engaged. The performances from Benedict Cumberbatch, Cody Smith-McPhee, and Kirsten Dunst are all top-notch, but I think that Cumberbatch is the standout here by virtue of getting the most to do. The other two are doing phenomenal work, but the roles are intentionally subdued, and I found myself connecting to the film a little bit less when the scenes were focused on them. Jesse Plemons is also great when he's actually in the film, but he becomes so much less involved in the narrative as it progresses that he kind of gets lost in the fold. His nomination was awesome though, and a huge surprise. I don't know what to say about the plot because I don't want to spoil, but I will say that it presents a really compelling look at predation and protection and where our motivations for these sorts of actions stem from. Upon a second viewing, there was a lot that I caught that adds so many layers. I think I got a lot more out of Jesse Plemons in particular. There's a lot that's conveyed through some subtle acts of discomfort when around Cumberbatch's character that recontextualizes their relationship as brothers. Also, knowing how the film ends somehow made some sequences more tense. There's so many ways to analyze this film, from its Freudian undertones to its more explicit deconstruction of the Western, and it provoked an hours-long conversation after showing it to my friends. It's absolutely winning Best Picture, and deservedly so, because I'm giving it a 9 out of 10.
And West Side Story.
While I've mostly enjoyed the mature political dramas that Spielberg has directed in recent years like The Post and Bridge of Spies, it is so refreshing to see him return to a project that feels honestly pretty magical. I don't know how to put it other than he just directed the shit out of this movie. There's a spark of Jurassic Park, Jaws, and E.T. here that put a grin on my face by the time it was over. The performances are good overall, but I feel like it's hard to talk about them because Ariana DeBose and Mike Feist so clearly overshadow everyone else. When these characters were on screen, it felt like everything came alive in a way that wasn't entirely there otherwise. So when, spoilers for a 60-year-old play based on a 400-year-old play, Riff dies halfway through, the absence was a little bit noticeable. The film does not at all feel its 2.5-hour runtime. You could have told me it was an hour 45 and I would have believed you, but I am so glad it's as long as it is. It makes all the right choices of what to adapt, what to cut, what to rearrange, and I'd argue that it might be the better of the two film adaptations, improving on many of the first shortcomings that were products of its time. It's such a shame that this was a total box office flop, but hey, what are you gonna do? I loved this way more than I expected to, and it has all the makings of a Spielberg classic. 8 out of 10.
The nominees for performance by an actress in a leading role. Jessica Chastain in The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
Look, I want to start this review with the positives. Jessica Chastain and Andrew Garfield are having so much fun with these roles. They are bombastic, weird, sleazy, horny, sentimental, and everything in between. But the film suffers from a god-awful screenplay. It manages to be a by-the-numbers biopic while also making the typical beats that work so well for other films cut from the same cloth feel really hollow. It especially falters in its second half, blitzing through much of the breakdown of Jim and Tammy Faye's marriage, along with the details of Jim's scandal, only to grind to a halt and trip over itself at the finish line with a final 15 minutes that feels so incredibly tacked on. The film really comes down to two fantastic performances elevating really subpar material. It's a 4.5? Nah, I'll just say 5 out of 10.
Olivia Colman in The Lost Daughter.
I liked The Lost Daughter for the most part, but it does have quite a bit holding it back. Olivia Colman is becoming a perennial Oscar nominee, and her nomination was obvious, but Jessie Buckley's nomination was unexpected and pretty great. But what stood out to me most is the score, which is something I almost never notice. Crazy that it wasn't even shortlisted. I liked how uncomfortable the film feels with its subject matter and the choices the characters make. It's able to convey how taboo but secretly common these feelings towards motherhood are without ever actually stating it. It handles its tone superbly. I also found that the way it treats its characters really bold. It's okay with reaching the conclusion that some people are just kind of bad, but that doesn't mean they're devoid of a lot of the mundane parts of life we take for granted. It also smartly skews away from falling into a deep conversation about what it means to be a bad person. Sometimes the selfish decisions we make are really that thoughtless. It also places characters in a very similar situation while leaving some far more sympathetic than others, creating really interesting foils. However, it's maybe 15 to 20 minutes too long. It might have benefited from a tighter 90-minute runtime because it has a lot of beats to cover in the final 10-15ish minutes that probably could have been spread out over the second half in lieu of some other included moments. The movie theater scene, as great as her yelling is, and the Livin' on the Prayer dance sequence in particular feel really cuttable, along with basically Ed Harris's entire character. Maggie Gyllenhaal definitely knew what she was doing here, and it's a solid directorial debut that I'm giving a 7 out of 10.
Penelope Cruz in Parallel Mothers.
For the first half of this film, I was fully prepared to give this a 9 out of 10. Masterful setup and characterization leads to twists and turns within the narrative, albeit some fairly obvious from the get-go, all the while keeping you absolutely mesmerized by its simple yet dynamic cinematography and its buttery dialogue, spoken through some incredible performances by Penelope Cruz and Melina Smith. It's soapy and melodramatic in all the right ways, presenting the audience with a reality that is heightened in its events yet grounded in its emotions. Then the film just kind of stumbles for a bit. After some incredible setups, the film awkwardly tries to navigate its themes about motherhood, connection, the past, and generational love, while not really sure where to take the story. Events play out as one would expect, and subplots reach their natural conclusions, but they do nothing to say much about the ideas the film is trying to address. The first half of this film unravels, while the second half just happens, culminating in a very hypnotic yet a little unsatisfying experience. 7 out of 10.
Nicole Kidman in Being the Ricardos.
It seems like every award season has a villain that people root against for getting nominations and wins it doesn't deserve. Last year had Trial of the Chicago 7, the year before that was Joker, then Bohemian Rhapsody, and this year it seems to be Being the Ricardos. Which is funny because honestly, I liked this more than at least one of the Best Picture nominees this year. It's very entertaining, if not a little superficial. Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem are really good, and they're clearly having a lot of fun with Sorkin's snappy as ever dialogue. Aaron Sorkin also feels more comfortable as a director here than he did with Trial of the Chicago 7 or Molly's Game, even pursuing some really creative sequences in which Lucy visualizes a potential episode, cutting back and forth between her planning and a performance of what the bit could look like. It was a really cool way of portraying how her mind worked. The supporting cast also does a really good job. Nina Aranda and J.K. Simmons are really solid, and as a big fan of Arrested Development, I'm always happy to see Alia Shawkat and Tony Hale. A major complaint I've seen is that it tries to condense events that happened across Lucy's life into just 1 week, and while yeah, that might be true, I don't really care. It's just a dramatization. Overall, it's kind of the equivalent of a marshmallow. It's really good, but lacking in substance. 6 out of 10.
And Kristen Stewart in Spencer.
So I think Pablo Larraín might just be one of those directors I respect but don't really enjoy. Oh well. The tone of Spencer is really intense and suffocating, but I wasn't invested enough in what was going on screen, so the overall viewing experience was just kind of uncomfortable, I guess. I felt really restless and frustrated while watching this, but I don't think in the way the movie wanted me to. It's telling an incredibly intimate and torturous story of someone who is so glorified in pop culture, but I struggled to connect to what I was seeing. I also have some gripes about the cinematography. There are some really cool shots here, but this grainy, fuzzy quality that helps build the uncomfortable atmosphere kind of ruined my appreciation of how the film captures the setting in some otherwise really gorgeous wide shots. There are also some editing choices where I understood what they were going for, but I think the execution was so choppy to the point where it took me out of the movie just as I finally felt engrossed towards the end of the second act. And I know I'm gonna take a lot of flack for this, but I didn't find Kristen Stewart's performance all that great. She delivers every line with the exact same cadence and emphasis that felt more like a caricature at points. In some ways, I feel like I saw a completely different movie than everyone else. Lots of what it's getting praised for I really disliked, and I'm truly disappointed because I feel like I'm missing out on a film that everyone else is really enjoying. I'm giving it a 3 out of 10, but I really wish I liked this one.
The nominees for performance by an actor in a leading role are Andrew Garfield in Tick, Tick, Boom.
When I first watched Tick, Tick, Boom, I thought it was just okay, but as it sat with me, I found myself enjoying it in retrospect a little bit more. I think it mostly hinges upon Andrew Garfield's performance, which, if I'm a member of the Academy, would definitely have my vote. However, the rest of the film feels really uneven. The songs are either absolute bangers like 3090 or Therapy, or they're more generic like, well, most of the others. Other than the main conflict of Jonathan writing his musical, many of the plot lines feel somewhat underdeveloped, especially Robin De Jesus' character and his whole deal, for lack of spoiling the film, but that's reflected in him having just 14 minutes of screen time. Even with its issues, Garfield's performance keeps me remembering Tick, Tick, Boom positively. It's a 10 out of 10 performance in a honestly 4 out of 10 movie, which probably leaves it at a 7 out of 10.
And Denzel Washington in The Tragedy of Macbeth.
As an English major who has written multiple papers on Macbeth, the announcement of this film was like catnip to me, and I was not disappointed in the slightest. The Tragedy of Macbeth is one of the best cinematic adaptations of a Shakespeare play to date. It's ironic that Kenneth Branagh has a Best Picture contender this year, and as soon as he moves away from the Bard into an actual personal project, someone else sweeps in to make an adaptation that blows all others out of the water. I've never seen such an incredible melding of cinematography and production design. They work together flawlessly to create some truly stunning imagery. There's only so much you can do with a Shakespeare film if you're sticking to the text, and the choices here made in regard to the blocking and the setting of certain moments creates a really incredible vision of the play. I don't feel justified in giving it a 9 or 10 because at the end of the day it's still just Macbeth, but this is one of the strongest 8 out of 10s I can possibly give.
So here are the nominees for Best International Feature Film. Flee, Denmark.
Flee, Denmark's submission is incredibly unique. A fully animated documentary, it's able to tell its story in a unique way that feels really appropriate for its subject matter. The art style has this storybook aesthetic that both softens and adds to the poignancy of the horrible events being told, all while it keeps you grounded. It even animates moments where Amin has to take a break from the interview because of just how hard it is to relive his memories of fleeing Afghanistan for Western Europe as a refugee, reminding you that this is a very, very real story. It might not feel like a documentary because of how immersive its narrative is, but it is very real. The animation and an alias conceal his identity, but somewhere out there is a man who truly went through all of this. Not only that, this is something that countless people from war-torn nations have gone through and are going through now. It might not be my absolute favorite movie of the year, but I think it might be the most important. 8 out of 10.
The Hand of God, Italy.
Italy's submission to the international feature category is very reminiscent of Roma in that it primarily reflects on a director's childhood hometown and coming of age. The first hour of this film is very much a hangout film. You spend a lot of time with this family and get to observe all of their odd quirks while feeling really engrossed into the connection they all share. All of the dynamics feel incredibly honest and real in a way that so many similar movies do not get right at all. The second half takes a dark turn that shakes up this dynamic, but I feel like the pathos of it doesn't entirely land. I think it has a lot to do with how stark and cold the presentation is, and while it's a really interesting contrast to the first half, I wasn't connecting with it as much as I would have liked. That being said, watching it was still a really enjoyable experience. It has fantastic pacing and the runtime flies by. I don't know if I'd be super eager to revisit this soon, but I definitely really liked it. 7 out of 10.
Luana, A Yak in the Classroom, Bhutan.
Lunana, A Yak in the Classroom is bold titling itself that, because the yak doesn't even show up in the classroom until an hour and 15 minutes into its hour and 45 minute runtime. I know that seems like an odd thing to complain about, but it illustrates my main issue with the film. Most of the actual forward momentum occurs in the last third, leaving most of the film confused about what to do with itself as it just kind of twiddles its thumbs, waiting for its by-the-books plot to finally rear its inoffensive head. Another thing that really stood out to me was the amount of foreshadowing that literally never gets any payoff. They do it like 4 times and it's kind of jarring. That's not to say there isn't anything here redeeming. They have some gorgeous mountains to film, and although the crew is seemingly limited in how they can present them on a technical level, it's still very nice to look at. But don't expect any Peter Jackson sweeping overheads here. Even with this limitation, the film builds a really specific atmosphere that I can only describe as naturalistic. This is the type of movie you can smell. Overall, it's generally feel-good and accessible, but it sticks out in a category where Asghar Farhadi's A Hero is noticeably absent. 5 out of 10.
And the worst person in the world, Norway.
I didn't know exactly what I was expecting when I went into this, but it certainly wasn't an incredibly cleverly written deconstruction of the stereotypes held of and by multiple generations. It tackles so many of the internet's favorite topics like cancel culture, feminism, and the supposed emptiness of the youth with such sardonic finesse that it makes it truly deserving of its screenplay nomination. Its 12-chapter structure keeps things moving at a speedy but very natural pace, which makes the few moments in which it slows all the more effective. The performances are great and they do the material justice, but if it was going to break out of the international feature category into just one above the line, screenplay was absolutely the right call. I can see this growing on me with subsequent rewatches, but for now it's getting a 7 out of 10.
Here are the nominees for achievement in costume design.
Ooh.
Cruella.
Although the trailer seemed off-putting to many, I was actually mildly interested to see Cruella solely because it represented something slightly different to the constant stream of Disney live-action remakes. The only one of them that I actually enjoyed was The Jungle Book, and that's probably because I've not seen the original. So, an origin story for a character instead of a straight-up remake seemed kind of promising, and I'm whelmed to report that it's just fine. I'm not hung up about how different this character is because I don't have much nostalgia for 101 Dalmatians, so I was able to come in with a moderately unbiased perspective. I think most of the elements of the film are serviceable. There are some fun set pieces, the cast is alright, and the story was absurdly convoluted and way more complicated than a Cruella de Vil origin needed to be, but I was okay with it. It deserves its costume design nomination though, and it's probably gonna win. There are some really cool designs here, and I think it's kind of hilarious that the fun and games section of the narrative involves Cruella trolling people with the costumes. The main issue with the film is that it is just way too long. This should not have been more than 1:45, but it is 2 hours and 15 minutes. Why? So many of the beats in that extra 30 minutes feel repetitive or more appropriate earlier in the film. Overall, it's decent, but I'm probably not gonna rewatch it for quite a while. 5 out of 10.
Cyrano.
I have never experienced this degree of cognitive dissonance while watching a film. There are so many aspects here that really do not work, but I couldn't help but kind of enjoy it anyway. Can Peter Dinklage sing? Absolutely not. Do the characters have anything going on beyond what the plot demands of them? No. Does the film have any decent sense of pacing? Not at all. But none of that really matters because the film is just so damn authentic and unabashedly romantic that it just makes you want to smile. Some of the songs are actually pretty good, the production design and choreography are really striking, and it's all around just, well, pleasant. I probably won't rewatch it, but I don't miss the 2 hours it took from me. 6 out of 10.
Everyone up for achievement in makeup and hairstyling. Coming to America.
Coming to America is the definition of mediocre. It's not egregiously bad like a lot of these other years later sequels to classic movies, but it's nowhere near the highs of the first. While the returning actors are clearly happy to be back and slip right into their roles, the script does not provide much to work with, and that's made clear by the fact that most of the funny performances have to do with line delivery, body language, or other aspects of the performance that aren't tied to the screenplay. James Earl Jones didn't want to leave his house for filming, so all of his scenes had very strange editing too. It's overall just kind of unremarkable. 4 out of 10.
And House of Gucci.
I have complicated feelings about House of Gucci. I think it's consistent within Ridley Scott's filmography and that all of his films are just as good as the other people involved in the project. Every performance is exactly what you'd expect from each actor. Lady Gaga is committed as hell, Adam Driver is solid if not a little bit overshadowed, Al Pacino just shows up and does an Al Pacino thing, and Jared Leto's performance speaks for itself, but I was definitely here for it. However, the second half of this film grinds to a screeching halt with Lady Gaga absent for nearly an hour of the runtime, and the narrative shift really hurts the pacing, and while this is likely a screenplay or editing issue, I think that stems from Ridley Scott. The workman-like philosophy he's so well known for precludes him from making the necessary cuts that would have drastically improved the overall package. Another thing that especially bothered me was the god-awful color grading. No movie has ever demanded gold in such excess as this one, so there is no excuse for everything to look this gray, and I think it comes back to Ridley Scott lacking the visionary instinct to make this project the best it could be. It needed a Martin Scorsese at the helm, In fact, now that I think about it, the premise of this movie was tailor-made for Scorsese. Anyway, 6 out of 10. There's a lot to enjoy here, but it is not without some serious concessions.
Here are the nominees for Achievement in Music Original Song.
No Time to Die from No Time to Die.
My review for No Time to Die actually ended up being quite lengthy, so if you want to get my full thoughts on it, go check out my Letterboxd. What I'll say for this video is this is a stunning conclusion to a stunningly confusing era of Bond, but I think it's quite fitting for where Daniel Craig's character ended up. I really enjoyed it, and I'm giving it an 8 out of 10.
And Somehow You Do from 4 Good Days.
Damn you, Diane Warren, for making me watch such mediocre movies because of a song nomination. I feel like over the last few years, studios have produced less Oscar bait as the Academy has begun to recognize a lot more films that would have been overlooked, say, 10 years ago, but then shit like this comes along and rears its head. I was originally going to give it a 5 out of 10, but as it went on, I got a little too annoyed with some elements. Addiction movie cliches galore, and every time the dialogue approached even the slightest semblance of subtext, the next line just said it. All the other elements of the film feel just as half-assed. Glenn Close is here for some reason, Mila Kunis is delivering her most average performance of all time, and the cinematography is cripplingly bland. I have other stuff on my list, and I spent an hour 40 on this. Why? 4 out of 10.
Here are the nominees for Achievement in Visual Effects. Free Guy.
Free Guy feels like it was constructed in a lab as the perfect film for the average 11-year-old boy, and I mean that in a nice way. I really think if I was the right age for this, I would have had an absolute blast. It's got just enough raunchy humor to make the kiddos think they're watching something edgy, it's full of really specific and accurate video game references, and it does away with this common approach with Hollywood where they just sort of half understand the medium. Most of the time when characters in a movie talk about a video game, it sounds like an alien traveled to Earth, interviewed a 40-year-old mom who tried her best to recall what her son says when they talk about Call of Duty, and then an alien wrote a script based off of it. This movie doesn't do that, and it's refreshing. Ryan Reynolds has really settled into his whole shtick, and he brings enough charm here to make everything work quite well. The supporting cast is pretty decent too. Yes, even whatever Taika Waititi is doing. Now, all that said, it's still kind of the Fortnite movie, and it's definitely for an 11-year-old audience, so it's got a ceiling on its rating. That ceiling is a 6. It's a 6 out of 10.
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.
Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is most certainly a Marvel movie, and that's not a bad thing. I like most Marvel movies, and this one is maybe just above an average one. I'm actually surprised by that. I think Destin Daniel Cretton's filmography is pretty mediocre overall, but the direction is pretty competent, and it really helps bring out some of the great choreography along with very constrained editing. The screenplay leaves a lot to be desired, especially when it comes to actually characterizing Shang-Chi. He feels really passive through a lot of his film, and I think it's a side effect of having so many side characters and trying to give them all something to do. It's not amazing, but it fits snugly into the Marvel competence. 6 out of 10.
Spider-Man. No Way Home.
It's weird for me to try and talk about this movie in the context of having a single nomination for visual effects, and honestly, do you really need to hear my thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home? Spider-Man's my favorite superhero. I've grown up with this character at the forefront of the media I consume, and when the film not only takes everything I love from previous films, but presents it in a new and compelling way that does justice to Spider-Man characters' origins and gets the soul of the characters, yeah, I love this movie. It's an 8 out of 10 with some 10 out of 10 fan service, so interpret that score as you will.
Here are the nominees for the Best Animated Feature Film. Encanto.
It's amazing how much Disney Plus propelled Encanto to popularity after a mediocre box office performance. We don't talk about Bruno as charting higher than Frozen's Let It Go. Every aspect of the film is bleeding through TikTok, and I've gotta say, there are many worse films that this could have happened to. Encanto is pretty solid. I think it might be juggling a little too many characters, with certain ones really falling to the wayside, but overall it stays very focused and provides great commentary on how we categorize and reinforce the abilities of children, and the impact that our adult attitudes towards intelligence and potential can have. I think the ending is a little weak, but if it were to be fixed, the film might have run too long, so I'll take concise over unnecessary. Like I said, it's pretty good. 7 out of 10.
Luca.
I understand the appeal of Luca's simplicity, both in concept and in theme, but to me it felt like a retread of ideas explored in other Pixar films more successfully. It's cute, well-paced, and the animation looks really crisp, but I don't think I got much new out of it. 6 out of 10.
The Mitchells versus the Machine.
I was totally surprised by how much I loved The Mitchells vs. the Machines. The marketing for this film was basically, hey, we're the team that did Spider-Verse. But that's true for a lot of films from Sony Pictures Animation, so it's not a guarantee of quality. But here, it really pays off. There's such a unique vividity to this film, as if it took the common criticism of kids' movies being too hyper and loud, and showed us how to use that type of energy to the film's advantage. It takes an incredibly complex approach to its subject matter, and especially considering the plot, it's admirable because it would have been so easy to make the theme of the movie technology bad. Side note, I'm also so glad that Netflix let the creators use the original title. Connected is the most generic title imaginable. Anyways, 8 out of 10.
And Raya and the Lost Dragon.
Raya and the Last Dragon is what happens when you put world building first and character, theme, and story second. I thought the premise was intriguing, but the film drops the ball in almost every way otherwise that I have no desire to revisit it. The themes of forgiveness and trust are handled messily to say the least, and the pace of the film is so breakneck that there's never any time to actually absorb all of the varied locations. Most of the characters aren't even well defined and they feel so unnecessary. The ones that do have proper characterization sometimes act extremely out of character. Nothing here feels congruent. It is far from Disney's best in recent years. 4 out of 10.
And now, here are the nominees for Best Documentary Feature.
Okay, so before I review the Best Documentary Feature section, I want to give a shout out to Procession, which was somehow not nominated here. It's an incredible documentary about dealing with deeply suppressed pain and coming to terms with that pain through shared experiences and healing through art. It's incredibly moving, and it made my top 10 of the year. It's on Netflix, so go check it out. Anyway, on to 4 inferior movies.
Ascension.
Maybe observational documentaries are just not my thing, because I found Ascension incredibly tedious and frustrating. It reminds me of that clip of Werner Herzog when he talks about how documentary filmmakers should be active in presenting the material in a creative way and avoid being just a fly on the wall. This feels like it takes that latter approach, but very much to its detriment. It has some interesting parallels when presenting the approach to labor in China and the US, but it never gets to any sort of criticism or analysis or insight. And if that was the intention, I didn't think it was particularly effective. It would be one thing if it was presenting the material in order to provoke the audience into coming to those conclusions themselves. However, I don't think it provides enough to make those conclusions. So overall, I'm gonna give Ascension a 4 out of 10.
Attica.
As sad as I was to see a couple of the predicted top 5 nominees not make it into the category, I'm certainly glad Attica was one that got a surprise nomination instead. I didn't know anything about the Attica prison riot before watching this, and I'm kind of appalled that this isn't taught as an important event in modern American history. It's an incredibly dark and difficult topic to approach, and I was really impressed with how the filmmakers were able to tread a very fine line when discussing so many political influences over the situation. I do think that treading carefully did hold it back from some opportunities for more creative filmmaking, however. I found myself often wishing that the information was being presented in a little bit more of an engaging way, since the basic format is just archival footage and talking heads. Anyway, it's a really important subject and a film I certainly enjoyed, but it needed just a little bit more for it to be really, really great. 7 out of 10.
Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised.
I understand why a lot of people really liked Summer of Soul, but to me it felt a little too loosely structured to get me fully invested. It relies mostly on musical archival footage with a few talking heads sprinkled in, and I can't help but feel like it would have been enjoyed best as something in the background while doing something else. I found my attention wavering, and maybe that's just me, but I feel like it didn't quite grab me the way some of these other documentaries did. I admire this more so as a historical preservation project than a full documentary. It's certainly a good film, there's nothing bad about it at all, it just maybe didn't do a lot for me, or it wasn't quite my style of documentary. 6 out of 10.
And Riding with Fire.
Riding with Fire has flashes of really vibrant and creative filmmaking, which makes it all the more frustrating that the majority of its presentation feels very rote. While I understand the decision to let the subject matter speak for itself sometimes, I found myself wishing that it would lean into its more ambitious editing choices more frequently. Segments in which it presents the growth of the publication's YouTube channel come to mind specifically. This feels like two different films on the same subject meshed together to mixed results. There's a great film somewhere in the editing bay, and the team behind this clearly has the right instincts, and if they had fully committed to their vision, I think the film would have been better for it. 6 out of 10. And here we arrive at the part of the review where I really don't feel like giving an equal amount of energy to these. With most of the full-length features, I tried to say an ample amount even if I really didn't have a lot, but with these, I'm not gonna bother, so consider this a rapid-fire round as we go through these 15 short films, but some I will have more to say than others.
Here are the nominees for Best Animated Short Film. Affairs of the...
I really did not like Affairs of the Art. The animation style is off-putting, everything is gross and weird and uncomfortable and unnecessarily indulgent in really awful imagery. It would be one thing if this was meant to challenge the audience, but it just comes off as grotesque for grotesqueness' sake. The one thing that kept this from getting the lowest possible score is that the animation style is at least unique in a way. Anyways, 2 out of 10.
Bestia.
Now, if I wasn't such a fanboy of Aardman, I'd be ranking Bestia as my favorite of these shorts. Over the course of its 15 minutes, it's able to peel back so many disturbing layers and present how atrocities can be committed when they're minimalized and normalized. Using porcelain dolls to represent this develops the uncanny factor, depicting those who are complicit as almost inhuman, and it is such an effective choice. There are so many things I want to pick apart and analyze with this, and I do not understand how it's even in the same league as the other nominees. 8 out of 10.
Box Ballet.
There's nothing crazy deep about Box Ballet, but it does a good job of showing instead of telling, along with a cute, if not kind of formulaic, opposites attract story that's able to give its two characters multiple moments in its 15 minutes. It's a 5 out of 10.
Robin Robin.
I'll fall for literally anything Aardman does, and this was no different. I think that 30 minutes was the perfect runtime for this. It easily could have been a 90-minute film that felt dragged out, but making it a half-hour special kept everything so crisp and to the point. It gives time for strong characterization and fun moments, but it doesn't get bogged down in developing any unnecessary elements. I'm really happy that this is the frontrunner now that Us Again has been snubbed, and you should definitely check it out on Netflix. 8 out of 10.
And the Windshield Wiper.
This short felt like it was just throwing out a bunch of vignettes that had something to do with love, added some interesting animation styles, and said to the audience, hey, now you do the work of pretending we're coming up with compelling ideas about love. It's not great. 4 out of 10.
And now, the nominees for Best Live Action Short Film.
Well done.
A la Kachu, Take and Run.
A la Kachu, Take and Run was the final film screened at my showing of the Oscar-nominated live-action shorts, and by this point I had felt pretty confident that, like the animated category, this was a mixed bag with some fairly high highs and nothing that completely blew me away. However, over the course of this film's 40-minute runtime, which honestly felt like 20 minutes, I was completely proven wrong. The film does a great job of foreshadowing its subject material, but I was genuinely surprised when the narrative fully revealed itself. It made me feel angry, tense, and elated, and it was such a nice surprise to finish this journey of watching every nominee on a high note. 9 out of 10.
The Dress.
The Dress is, for most of its 30-minute runtime, which it feels every minute of, an uplifting story about how disabilities don't and shouldn't prohibit someone from owning their sexuality and fully experience being human. The final minutes of this short then spit in the face of every single theme it's built up. It feels very cruel and cynical, and it left me with a bad taste in my mouth by the end. 3 out of 10.
The Long Goodbye.
Riz Ahmed, star of the 2018 smash hit film Venom, produces 3 very different films all within 11 minutes, and somehow it actually works really well and doesn't feel messy. The transition from slice of life to intense dystopia to a poetry slam thesis is jarring, but in a way that fits the subject matter really well, and it was really effective. It covers a lot of heavy subject matter, and it feels laser focused in the themes it wants to convey. 7 out of 10.
On My Mind.
On My Mind is a very simple story with a sweet sentiment about grief and accepting someone's passing. It didn't blow me away by any means, and it feels a little student filmy at some points, but it doesn't do anything wrong. 5 out of 10.
And Please Hold.
Please Hold is very in-your-face with its commentary about technological takeover in the prison industrial complex, but it's pretty entertaining, and at 18 minutes, it doesn't overstay its welcome. 6 out of 10.
Here are the nominees for Best Documentary Short Subject. Audible,
Audible follows the story of a sports biopic so closely that I forgot it was a documentary at times, and I mean that as a compliment. Beyond that, it's a well-made presentation of overcoming adversity with some really strong direction. I liked it. It's probably my favorite, and it would probably get my vote, but I don't think it has much of a chance of winning. But I'll give it a 6 out of 10.
Lead Me Home,
Lead Me Home dances around its subject matter with very little depth. I get that they were trying to focus on the people in question, but they don't even really spend much time on that. It felt so empty and doing so little with a 40-minute runtime. 4 out of 10.
The Queen of Basketball,
So I think part of the success of a good documentary is being able to make its audience care about its topic even when the audience has no prior interest in the subject matter, and The Queen of Basketball does an okay job here. I don't have any interest in sports or sports history, but this definitely presents an interesting and overlooked area of its subject matter, and I think it was overall successful. I think it's probably going to win, especially since the subject matter just passed away a couple months ago, and I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10.
3 Songs for Ben-Azir.
This felt like the inverse of Robin Robin in a way. While that film felt like a 90-minute movie that was wisely cut down to a 30-minute short, 3 Songs for Ben-Azir feels like a 20-minute excerpt from a much better full-length documentary. There just wasn't enough for me to grab onto. I appreciate that the documentary about refugees that actually examines hopes and dreams instead of suffering is here, but I just wanted more. 5 out of 10.
And When We Were Bullies.
Although this is the first year that I've watched all the shorts, I'm well aware that the Academy always nominates one that sticks out like a sore thumb each year, and my god, this is it. However, I'm not entirely surprised that this got the nomination. When We Were Bullies is the exact type of self-congratulatory, tone-deaf, fake apology that's popular in Hollywood. In many ways, it reminded me of self-absorbed vlog YouTubers, where the topic is presented as intriguing, but the underlying motivations and conclusions are morally reprehensible. This is complemented by incredibly tedious and repetitive filmmaking. I have to wonder if this guy is somewhat aware of how this film was coming across. I mean, a pivotal scene comes when his 92-year-old elementary school teacher tells him that the film is going to be bad. And bad it was. 2 out of 10. And that's a wrap. You know, I find it odd that so many people consider this lineup a weak year, because I found myself enjoying a lot more than I thought I would, and I gave 4 9 out of 10s in the Best Picture lineup. While I don't think we'll see a stronger year than the 2020 Oscars for quite a while, I certainly think this was better than 2021, as well as 2019 and 2018. I'm really glad this was the year I chose to go all in. I felt like I was exposed to a far greater variety of styles and subject matter than usual within my given year of typical movie watching habits. If you liked what I had to say, or even if you didn't, I hope you subscribe and stick around, because I promise I've got a lot of interesting videos in the works. Oh, and check out my Letterboxd in the description as well, because I update that almost daily. And with that said, I hope I'll be back on this journey again next year, and I hope you'll be with me.